Hello, my name is Miriam McLemore, and I am an enterprise strategist with AWS, and I'm thrilled to have the opportunity today to speak with you about transformation and agility as key enablers of competitive advantage. The role that I have at AWS is as an executive advisor. Prior to joining AWS, I was the corporate CIO for the Coca-Cola Company. I was with Coca-Cola for many years and drove our transformation to leveraging cloud technology, and have now at AWS the opportunity to work with customers on their journey to leveraging cloud technology, transforming their organizations, and driving speed and agility. And so, based on the conversations that I've had over the last 3.5 years now with AWS, I've collected a number of use cases and insights from other customers that I'm excited to share with you today. And hopefully some of this you find valuable in your own transformation journey. We all come from this old world business. I certainly have been in the industry for, over 35 years, so quite some time now. And, we lived in the world of data centers and brick and mortar, certainly at Coca-Cola. We had disintegrated processes and fragmented data. And getting to a new world business model really was our objective for streamlining and transforming the business. And so that, looks like being able to respond to digital and disruptive technologies and take advantage of those opportunities and address the fact that there are now high consumer expectations, and we live in a digital economy. And if this pandemic has taught us nothing else, certainly it is the lesson of globalization and geopolitical forces that our businesses face. And, at Coca-Cola, all of that was true. In my role at Coke, I actually started at Coke in finance, spent 7 years in the finance organization. Then I moved to the global marketing team and led all business intelligence for the company globally out of the marketing organization. And then I spent the last dozen years of my career in IT, retiring at the end of 2016 as the corporate CIO. And we had, of course, a very large business. You would be probably familiar with Coca-Cola, over 130 years old, 500 major brands around the world, lots of product line extension. It's a franchised business, so over 200 bottling partners that work with Coca-Cola, operating in over 210 countries. So quite the scale of business. And so from a technology standpoint, we really had three principal focuses for our strategy. One was digitizing for the consumer, right? Making sure that we were bringing new and differentiated consumer experiences as part of our brand experience. And then second was digitizing for the customer. Obviously, Coke does business with very large customers around the world, and having new capabilities at shelf, on e-commerce sites, in store, route to market, all of these things were critical to the Coke global business. And then, of course, digitizing for the enterprise itself. I had responsibility, for example, for the HR portfolio, and needed to transform that portfolio of technologies. So lots of focus internally as well as consumer and customer facing. And, that required, and I came from a data background, that we got our data right and leverage the power of data. So I'll refer to on occasion some of my experience from Coca-Cola, but also from other customers in this journey of unlocking business agility. I love the definition from MIT and Peter Weil. He talks about the need for companies to not only think agilely, but you actually have to be agile and act, importantly, act agile so that you can capitalize on opportunities and respond to risk in your marketplace. And it's so important. Speed matters in business, always has, but oh, so much more in our world today. That ability to respond. And so, based on the conversations that I've had the opportunity to have with large enterprises around the world, across industries, obviously, I talk a lot to retail and CPG companies based on my background, but I talk also to banks and insurance companies and oil and gas and healthcare, life sciences, just really across the board of all sectors. And based on those conversations and the conversations that our team has had, these are some of the characteristics that we have found that really describe when a customer has become an agile organization. The first and most important, I do believe, is having a deeply shared purpose and an understanding of your customer journey. Getting that right and getting that embedded, not just in the business, but across the IT organization, actually really enables the right selection of tools and technology and decision making based on customer needs. Second is getting to the place of autonomous cross-functional teams. And you, of course, have heard of that and the advent of product teams and small teams. Certainly it is the way that Amazon and AWS operate, but getting to a place where those teams are actually cross-functional and they have the skills that they need to drive a capability, again, drive speed into your organization, and it empowers teams to make decisions. And it's not, that we're promoting anarchy and letting people run off and do whatever they want. We believe very strongly and see in customers that standardized ways of working are things that enable speed. I actually started my career with Arthur Andersen and Company, and that was something that we knew way back then, is that there were standardized ways of working that allowed consultants to perform consistently and provide value quickly to customers. And it is true today, certainly at Amazon. We operate what we call mechanisms. Those are the ways we work and how we work. And I'll describe a couple of those for you as we go through this discussion this morning. The other is democratized experimentation, right? You talk about experimenting in many companies, but what goes very closely with democratizing experimentation is enabling a culture that embraces failure. And that is one of the hardest struggles that I find with companies is, it's okay for others to fail, but maybe not me. And you've got to get to a place where failure is an expected part of innovating. And it certainly is true. And it's something we all learn going up through school, right? When you do an experiment, things should fail because you've got to learn and pivot. And, to know how you're progressing, getting a performance orientation in place, we find is certainly critical. And it keeps you in a space where you can fail small because you're constantly watching your metrics. But to do any of these things, and I mentioned data right at the start of our discussion, information and data transparency, there's a lot of information in our global organizations, but unlocking that information so people have the right data to make the right decisions at the right time. That was certainly a cultural evolution that was necessary at Coca-Cola and necessary at many of the companies that I speak to. And once you get that data out in people's hands, having a learning culture so that they are taking that data, creating new insights for your business, identifying new opportunities and potentially risk for your business is absolutely critical and part of having and the benefits of having a learning culture. And then finally, of course, you've got to give your team the right tools so that they can deliver the value that you need to grow your business. And all of these characteristics really reinforce one another. And I think collectively are what we see as the core characteristics of an agile organization. And so the cloud certainly is one of those tools that enables organizations to become more agile. That was certainly the case at Coca-Cola, empowering teams by providing cloud technology so that test and learn was possible without a lot of upfront loading up of infrastructure and provisioning and all of the things that slow you down from a technology standpoint. Getting to a place where you're effectively using cloud technology to drive growth, to operate with efficiency, to bring data together for business insight. And then, of course, importantly, cloud gives you the ability to manage risk down. And that certainly was my experience and the experience that I've seen in the customers that I get to work with. But so why does everybody not do it? There seems to be barriers that we face. Certainly, one of those is the changing environment in which we are all operating. These world of uncertainty that we've certainly been living in for the last year plus now. And these high consumer expectations and fickleness, right? People were much more brand loyal for companies like Coca-Cola. That was something that was important to the business. And so getting consumer insights in your hands so that you can respond to the changing needs of your consumers and customers, absolutely critical. And there's low barrier to entry. Cloud has enabled a lot of that, right? So that startups have the power that many enterprises have quickly. But enterprises have unique advantages that I think is important not to lose sight of, and that you need to bring forward into your future. Certainly deep knowledge of your marketplace and your business, skilled and committed employees that really have a passion for your business, the financial resources that many of these small companies do not have, and the customer base and brand equity that you can grow based on, as well as operational processes that allow you to scale quickly. These small startup companies don't often have these advantages, and so it's important for large companies to take advantage of their strengths and also recapture the spirit of innovation that was part of their business. Certainly Coca-Cola was a startup company, right? It was a cough syrup, if you know the story of Coca-Cola. And I live here in Atlanta, Georgia, and that pharmacy where the cough syrup was invented is just here in downtown Atlanta. But grasping and securing that culture of innovation in your company is critical. So, back to why don't we all do it? Change is hard, right? There are established processes that enable us, but also established processes that slow us down. And you have to address your processes and streamline those processes. And I'm speaking of things like whether it's a finance review process or a security review process or an architecture review process or a gate review process. There are so many processes that are put in place for the right reason. But over time, we have lost sight of the business outcome those processes were meant to drive. And what happens is we just start executing the process. And those processes often create gates and barriers to achieving the results that are desires. And so streamlining your processes so they are guardrails versus barriers is key. Cultural resistance exists. I was with Coca-Cola for 26 years, so quite a long time, but there were people there longer than me. And, people felt like they knew the business and didn't need to change. And so getting past some cultural barriers and the acceptance of new ways of working can be a challenge for many companies, I find. And then, of course, that existing infrastructure certainly is a barrier, especially if you have the volume of technical debt that I see in many organizations and the fragility of systems. You have to address your technology environment. So the challenge is unblocking innovation while making the most of your strengths. And it truly is much more an organizational challenge than it is a technology challenge. The technology really works, right? And there is great technology available to you today. The question in front of you is, can you get your organization structured in a way and empowered such that you unlock data, you unlock the technology so that your business can derive value from what exists in the market today. And of course, do that in a secure manner. And so, to get yourself moving, one of the biggest things that I've seen that begins to create momentum is getting senior executive alignment. Because once you get the senior executives aligned, then they can amplify the message across the organization, because you can't just have one function or business unit driving and trying to drag the rest of the organization forward. You need the power of the team rowing in the same direction. An executive team can remove obstacles, whether those are technology or some of the processes that I mentioned. Removing the obstacles to progress is important. Redefining these standardized ways of working and how we operate with speeds and what is critical and what is not is certainly important as part of the agenda for a transformation. Quick escalation of issues. We are very good at issue escalation at Amazon. And that's something, if it's not core to your business, you should look at. I often suggest to companies that they should look at how they respond in a crisis and how issue escalation happens when they are in crisis. And you will learn some things about how you organize your teams, how you empower, and how you escalate issues, and what processes matter and don't matter when you absolutely have to get something solved. Delegating authority is critical, and I'll talk some more about the approach Amazon takes to a delegation of authority. And I don't mean it in terms of a charter or a chart of authority. I mean in actually pushing decision-making down in the organization actively, and then driving cultural change is the other thing the executives can do. But you've got to get the team on board, and that is that cultural change, because just having the executives saying we want to go fast doesn't work, right? The team's got to get on the bus and go with you. And so, again, it is much more of an organizational challenge than a technology challenge. So I'd like to share with you a little bit of how Amazon organizes and drives innovation across so many different domains. And when you look at Amazon, and I love this set of questions, right? Do you think of Amazon as a company? Is it a retailer? Is it a tech company? Right? Is it a marketplace? Is it a logistics company? Is it a publishing platform or a movie studio? And the fact is, it is all of those things. And that is because of the culture of innovation that exists at Amazon, empowering people to chase the ideas and make them into new capabilities and services that our customers can derive value from. And so, that all stems from the mission of Amazon, which is to be the Earth's most customer-centric company. It's not to be the biggest bookseller. It's not to be the best grocery provider. It's not to be the best publishing platform. It's to be customer-centric. And we believe if we do well by our customers do well, and then we will in turn do well. And our commitment is, again, customer-based and customer-obsessed, and it is about taking the friction out of a customer interaction and making customers' lives easier, whether that's an AWS proposition or whether that is a transaction that you might do on Amazon.com. And across Amazon, the leadership principles that drive this behavior are these 14. And, when I was interviewing at Amazon, having been at Coca-Cola for so many years, I wanted to work at a company where I felt like the culture would make sense to me. And I read these leadership principles and I can get behind all of them. And customer obsession, you see at the very top of the page, and that is the one that we start with. But certainly all of these leadership principles, whether it's ownership or our write a lot or delivered results or bias for action, as I mentioned, or frugality or think big and strategically and invent and simplify. I like all the leadership principles, but I'm going to call out 3 of them specifically that I felt like, at least in my experience at Coca-Cola, would have been beneficial if we had known more about these principles and leveraged some of what Amazon has done. And so the first of those being this customer obsession. Certainly at Coke, we talked about being consumer centric, but Amazon takes this to a whole nother level. And we actually have standardized ways of working that drive this leadership principle of customer obsession. And we call it working backwards. We start with a customer value statement and we work backwards from that statement. And the standardized process or mechanism, as we call it, at Amazon starts with writing. When you have an idea, you write a press release. You describe the idea as if it was being delivered to a customer or consumer in the market. And you write a narrative press release of the launch of that new feature, function, service, capability, program, offering, whatever it is, you write a press release. The second thing that you do is you write and you answer what you believe the frequently asked questions would be of a key supplier, partner, customer, stakeholder of this new capability. And what that does is, one, it sets the North Star of the idea via the press release. And then through the frequently asked questions, it puts you in the shoes of the various stakeholders and has you drive out the questions that they may have and expand your thinking even further. And then finally, we write or draw a user interaction manual or document that describes how it would work and gives a little bit more context to this new capability. That is the set of documents that are reviewed and approved before anything is funded, before anything is built or coded at AWS and Amazon. And so that's when I refer to a mechanism or a standardized way of working at Amazon, that what we call PR, press release, FAQ, PRFAQ as the acronym, that we use to start the ideation process. The second leadership principle that I want to speak to you about is this bias for action. And this is really based on pushing decision-making down as far into the organization as possible, because speed matters in getting decision-making as close to the folks that are doing the work and understand the customer value statement and need as possible. And so we have a mechanism for that, and it's called one-way door or two-way door decision-making. And across Amazon, everyone can describe this process to you. And what this means is a one-way door decision is a decision that needs senior leadership involvement. It's a decision that if you go through this door, it's going to be very difficult to walk back through the door and reverse your decision, whether for you that's entering a new market or launching a new brand or buying some other company. That may be a one-way door decision for you that's going to have implications if you try to walk back through that door. But most decisions that are made in an organization are actually two-way door decisions. They are decisions that can be made. And if you get on the other side of the door and realize it wasn't the right decision, you can come back through that door and make a different decision. And so we try very hard to push down as far as possible into the organization decisions that are two-way door decisions. And what that does is actually drive accountability down into the organization, because the people that are building new customer opportunities or capabilities are the ones making the decisions and are therefore accountable for their decisions, and they build and run what they created. So that importance of those small teams owning decision making and having accountability are key elements to this bias for action and the belief that speed matters in business. And then the third that, again, I felt like would have been very valuable to me in my career prior to joining Amazon is this idea of disagree and commit. And often I think people read this one wrong, but I love this one because it talks about the fact that we go through this writing process. And I mentioned we would review these documents, the PRFAQ, in a meeting. You actually come to a meeting, and the first 25 minutes of the meeting, you will sit quietly and read the documents that have been brought to the meeting. And it does a couple of things as far as a discipline and a way of working. One, it focuses everyone in the meeting on the idea being presented and on the data that is presented in the paper, not on the personality of the person presenting, not on how good they are on their feet, but on the idea and the data that has been collected. And that's one of the other leadership principles, right, is dive deep and know your data. But we read these documents and review documents, and this principle says we want you to have backbone and disagree. So stand up if you disagree with the idea being presented or an approach that is being pursued. We want you to disagree and bring your thoughts to the table. But it says, and commit at the end of this. Once we decide, we listen to all the feedback, we might go iterate a few more times, but once we decide to move forward with an idea or a concept, we ask that everyone commit to that idea or concept, because again, speed matters in business. And I too often throughout my career thought I went to a meeting, thought I got an agreement, only to have that be unwound later because someone didn't voice their concern in the meeting. They had some subsequent meetings, maybe later, and suddenly my decision was unmade. And there is nothing that slows you down more or is more frustrating to your organization than not knowing whether they can move forward, not knowing whether they actually got a decision or not. So this idea of disagree, have backbone, disagree, and commit is this leadership principle. And again, these are 3 of the 14 leadership principles that drive the culture of innovation at Amazon. But there's also at Amazon a mindset that drives the culture that I just want to briefly touch on, because it is the other part of the secret sauce. And one of the aspects of this mindset is that it is always day one. At Amazon, we believe it is important to always be leaning in to the business and thinking like a startup, believing you can be disruptive, and leaning in to keep your edge. We talk about actually what are day 2 behaviors. And a day 2 behavior is when you sit back, you accept you've done well enough, things are good enough, and that is when you've lost your edge. So we will challenge people as to whether they are demonstrating a day 1 or a day 2 behavior. And so leaning in and having a mindset that is always day 1 is important. The other that I really love at Amazon is this concept of innovation Darwinism. We are willing to try lots of ideas, but we believe that only the strongest ideas should survive. And so there's a number of mechanisms that we have for ensuring that the strongest ideas survive, whether that's the performance orientation and leveraging KPIs, whether that's the iterative nature of our innovation process and these small teams that own the ideas and can pivot, right? Because that peer FAQ sets the North Star, but doesn't tell people how to get to the North Star. So we're not prescriptive in how. We are stubborn on the vision, but flexible on the details on how you get there. So this concept of innovation Darwinism is much more like a venture capital model where you're willing to invest in many ideas and hope for, in baseball terminology, a single, a double, or a home run, or pick your sports analogy. But you want some to do okay, you want some to do really well. And so that is a mindset. Because of that mindset, we are okay developing things that have some amount of overlap because we believe it is better to develop two of something than none. And often the effort that you go through to resolve overlaps between conflicting ideas results in nothing getting created. And then the other important mindset is the willingness to embrace powerful new trends. Data certainly being one of those, and the use of tools like AI and ML to leverage data to effectively drive better customer experiences, certainly. And in the world of AWS, staying abreast of technology changes and keeping our customers current with technology is certainly part of the embracing powerful trends. And it is these things, the culture of the leadership principles, the mechanisms, and this mindset that I believe enables Amazon and AWS to innovate across so many different domains. And so if you would like to hear more about what we do at AWS specifically, we have a very broad training and certification program for enterprises and sets of tools, lots of collateral that is available to you and your teams to begin to build your knowledge. And certainly we would love to share this training or any of these insights with you. So thank you so much for your time today.